Every morning, the stray dog sat at the same bus stop, rain, snow, or sunshine. No one knew who he was waiting for, until one heartbreaking discovery explained everything. It started with a quiet routine no one really noticed at first. A dog, dusty and lean, with a reddish-brown coat that had once been soft, showed up at the corner of Maple and 3rd just before sunrise. He wasn't loud. He didn't bark or chase cars or dig through trash. He simply sat, always facing the same direction, always still, like he was waiting for something the rest of the world had forgotten. The town of Fairhill was small enough that most people crossed paths at least once a week. Mornings were slow, with old trucks rolling past and kids dragging backpacks bigger than they were. The first few days, people just thought the dog had wandered in by chance, but he came back again, and again, and again. Rain didn't stop him, wind didn't faze him. He'd sit at the edge of the bench, his head tilted ever so slightly, his eyes fixed down the road like he expected someone to step off the bus. When the 7:15 rolled in, he'd perk up, stand for a moment, ears forward. The door would hiss open. Passengers would step out, office workers, high schoolers, tired nurses ending night shifts, but the dog never moved. Then the door would close, the bus would leave, and the dog would sit back down, this time a little lower, like hope had drained from his bones. Around 7:30, he'd stand, shake the rain from his fur, and slowly trot off in the same direction every morning, past the bakery, past the broken fence behind the post office, until he was gone. They started calling him Rusty. Some kids said he looked like he was made of rust and autumn leaves. Others just liked the sound of the name. A few folks brought him scraps, half a sandwich, leftover bacon, a muffin wrapped in napkins. He always sniffed it politely, ate if he was hungry, and gave a small wag of his tail, more like a nod than joy. Then he went back to watching the road. Teenagers filmed him and posted videos online. Bus Dog, they called him. He became a kind of town secret, something gentle and sad that belonged to all of them. But no one really asked the big question. Not at first. Not until the cafe owner across the street, Linda, noticed the look in his eyes. "He's not just sitting," she said one morning to the mailman. "He's waiting. For someone. You can see it, in how still he gets when the bus pulls up, like his whole world is hanging on who steps off." The mailman, a quiet man named Gary, nodded. "Dogs remember," he said, "longer than we think." Still, no one knew why he came, or who he hoped to see, or why every morning without fail he kept returning to that spot, as if time would rewind itself and bring back whatever he had lost. But something about it stayed with them. The way he watched that road, the way he never stopped. And slowly, hearts began to ache, because sometimes the saddest stories don't shout, they just sit and wait. The bus came and went every day, just like the sun rising behind the old grain silos at the edge of town. Its brakes hissed, its doors creaked open, and for a moment, the street felt alive. But once the people stepped off or climbed on and the doors folded shut again, it was as if the world exhaled and went still. And through it all, the dog never moved. He sat at the same spot, near the faded yellow paint on the curb, head turned slightly toward the bus door. His ears twitched when the engine roared, but he didn't flinch. His tail didn't wag. He just looked, every single day. And when the last passenger disappeared, and the wheels began to roll again, he stood slowly, stretched his legs like an old man, and turned his back on the road. He walked without hurrying, passing the small flower shop where Mrs. Klein watered her roses, the gas station where no one ever seemed to notice him, and finally toward the edge of town. There, just behind a line of leaning pine trees, was an old abandoned lot with cracked concrete and knee-high grass. That's where he stayed. At night, no one saw him. But by morning, he was always back at the bus stop before the streetlights even blinked off. He didn't bark when kids walked past. He didn't growl when cats crossed the road or when squirrels darted through the trees. He was just quiet. The kind of quiet that came from deep inside, the kind born of waiting for something that mattered more than food or shelter. The town started calling him Rusty. No one remembered who said it first. Maybe it was the school janitor or the teenage girl who sold smoothies at the corner store. But the name stuck. It fit. His coat, once red and shiny, was dull now, colored like worn copper. His eyes were a soft amber that looked like they used to shine but didn't anymore. Linda, the cafe owner, was the first to leave out food. A small dish of scrambled eggs and a slice of ham. He sniffed it, then looked at her like he wasn't sure he deserved it. But he ate. And the next day, she left out more. She tried to call animal control once, just to check if he had an owner. They came with leashes and biscuits, but Rusty wouldn't let them near. He didn't bite. He didn't run. He just backed away, slowly, and stood there, still as stone, staring at the road. They left after that. Told her, "He's not a danger, just waiting for something." Rusty belonged to no one, but everyone felt something for him. There was a kind of ache in the way he moved. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was looking for something, or someone, that hadn't come yet. Children started waving to him from the school bus windows. A man from the hardware store gave him an old blanket. Teenagers, normally loud and distracted, would go quiet when they passed him. Because somehow, Rusty reminded them all of something they didn't want to admit. That love doesn't just stop. It waits, even when it hurts. And Rusty, the dog who never got on the bus, never chased a car, never barked at strangers, was waiting longer than any of them knew. Linda had run the Corner Cup Café for nearly 20 years. She knew everyone, by face, by order, by story. The regulars came in with sleepy eyes and left with hot coffee and full hearts. Her café sat right across the street from the bus stop, tucked between the florist and the laundromat, its big front window perfect for people watching. For the past few weeks, Linda had been watching him. The dog, the reddish one with the tired eyes. At first, she thought he was just another stray, but it didn't take long to see there was something different about him. He didn't dig through trash cans or bark at passing cars. He didn't chase squirrels or beg for food from tourists. He just sat, every morning, same spot, same time, and when the bus came and left, he'd get up and walk away, quiet and alone. Linda started bringing out scraps. Not much, just a bit of bacon or a biscuit wrapped in a napkin. The first time, he didn't touch it until she went back inside. He sniffed, ate, then looked toward the road again. The next day, she placed a small dish of scrambled eggs by the bench. He waited until she stepped back, then crept toward it slowly, like he was afraid it would disappear if he moved too fast. And that's how it started. A quiet ritual between a woman who had seen too much and a dog who never looked at her, only passed her. But one morning, Linda brought out a piece of sausage and sat down on the bench. The dog didn't run. He didn't growl. He stood a few feet away, still as always. She placed the food on the ground beside her and waited. "It's all right," she said softly, voice cracking from too many early mornings and too many years alone. "It's yours." He crept forward, slowly, step by careful step, then took the sausage and retreated to the sidewalk. He didn't leave, just laid down and watched the road, chewing in slow, thoughtful bites. That was when Linda remembered. A girl, maybe 10, maybe 11, small for her age, always wore a red backpack. She used to ride that bus every school morning, and always had a dog trotting beside her, not on a leash. Just following. Same red coat, same calm eyes. It had been years. The girl's name didn't come to her at first, but the memory hit hard. She remembered the way the dog had waited at the stop until the bus pulled away, then walked back down the road like he'd done his job. Every single day. Now Linda looked at the stray again, really looked. Her chest ached. "Is it you?" she asked under her breath. Her voice trembled as she leaned forward just a little. "Are you waiting for her?" The dog didn't move, didn't blink, but something in his eyes flickered. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd understood. Linda wiped at her cheek, surprised to find it wet. She stood, walked back to the cafe, and glanced one last time through the window. The dog was still there, watching the road. And she began to wonder, For the first time in years, if the past hadn't been buried after all, just waiting, just like him. 7 years ago, the town of Fairhill was shaken by a silence no one could explain. Sophie Hastings, 10 years old, smart and shy, vanished on her way home from school. One moment she was walking down Maple Street with her red backpack and freckles and bright blue shoes, and the next, gone, just like that. It was a Friday. The sky had been cloudy all day, the kind that made everything feel slower. Sophie had ridden the school bus that morning like usual. Her mother, Elise, waved to her from their front porch, coffee in hand, hair still damp from the shower. Sophie had smiled, that half-toothless grin only kids can pull off, and climbed aboard with her lunchbox swinging from her wrist. She never came home. When the bus dropped the kids off that afternoon, Sophie wasn't on it. The driver thought she had gone home with a friend, maybe had early pickup. The school secretary said a man had signed her out just before lunch, a man they didn't recognize. He'd used a name, Martin Hastings, but Sophie's father had passed away years before, and no one had asked for ID. By the time Elise got the call, the sun had already started to sink behind the rooftops. She ran to the school herself, her hands shaking, her voice rising. The police were called, search parties formed, flyers printed by morning. Neighbors, teachers, parents, they all looked. Woods, ditches, fields. They searched every inch of Fairhill and the roads beyond. Nothing, no backpack, no shoes, no Sophie. And the worst part? There was no sign of struggle, no scream, no clue, just a gap where a little girl had been. For weeks, the whole town felt different. Lights stayed on later. Locks were double-checked. Children were walked to school, not allowed to bike alone. Elise stayed up every night with the porch light on, just in case, just in case. Sophie found her way back. Her voice grew hoarse from interviews and pleading. She didn't run away, she told anyone who would listen. Someone took her. Someone took my baby. But time did what time always does. It pushed forward, and slowly, the world forgot. Except Elise. And maybe the dog. A few weeks after Sophie vanished, a reddish-brown dog started showing up at the bus stop. No collar, no tags, just quiet eyes and a body that looked like it had walked through something hard. He was cautious but not wild, hurt but still standing. Some folks thought he'd been dumped, maybe wandered in from the highway, but a few people remembered a dog just like him, in the old photos. The ones from Sophie's birthday parties, from Halloween parades, from the sidewalk on school mornings. It was him. No one could prove it, but everyone who really looked into his eyes knew. They didn't know where he'd gone after Sophie disappeared. Maybe he had searched too. Maybe he'd followed a scent no one else could pick up. Maybe he had gotten lost. But now he was back, and he waited. Every day, right there at the stop where he had once said goodbye. His fur was dull now, his body thinner, but his purpose had not changed. The world had forgotten Sophie Hastings. Rusty hadn't. Matt Reyes wasn't looking for a story that morning. He was just getting coffee, like always, half awake and already late. The news in Fairhill had been slow lately. Lost dogs, bake sales, road repairs, nothing that stuck. But when he stepped out of the Corner Cup Café and looked across the street, something pulled him to a stop. The dog. He'd heard about him, of course. Everyone had. The kids called him Rusty, and the older folks said he was a ghost with paws, always in the same spot. Always looking down the road like someone owed him an answer. Matt sipped his coffee and watched the dog's eyes follow the bus as it pulled away. Then Rusty stood, stretched, and walked off like he did every day, disappearing behind the old fence line. It hit Matt harder than he expected. That kind of loyalty. That kind of stillness. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that day, back at the paper, Matt found himself staring at a blank screen. He had a deadline for an article about parking lot expansions, but instead, he opened a different folder on his desktop. An old one he hadn't looked at in years. Sophie Hastings. The missing girl. He had been fresh out of college when it happened. his first real job, his first taste of real heartbreak. He remembered covering the search parties, the candlelight vigils, the way her mother's voice cracked during interviews. He remembered how the whole town stood still, and how, slowly, it began to move again, pretending not to limp. Matt started scrolling through photos. Sophie's school portrait, her hand-drawn missing posters, birthday pictures, and then he saw it. A puppy. In nearly every photo, there he was, a reddish-brown dog with a black snout and those same soft eyes. He was smaller, younger, with brighter fur, but the shape of him was unmistakable. Ears like folded triangles, a tiny white patch on his chest. Matt leaned forward, heart pounding. He zoomed in. The photo was grainy, but the details were clear enough. He opened a video from a school event. Sophie running across a field, laughing, her arms spread like wings. The puppy chased behind her, full of joy. She turned and knelt down, hugging him close. The same dog. It wasn't just a look-alike. It was him. Rusty wasn't a stray. He was Sophie's dog. Matt sat back in his chair, breath caught in his throat. How had no one seen this? How had they forgotten? He opened the file deeper, pulling up the police notes, the old articles, the witness statements. There were vague mentions of a dog, possibly accompanied by a pet, one report said, but nothing solid. It hadn't been a focus, not when a child had vanished. But now Matt knew. Rusty hadn't wandered into town. He had come back, and he'd stayed. For 7 years, he'd waited at the same bus stop, not because he was lost, but because he remembered. Matt stood up, grabbed his keys, and left the office without a word. He had a story now, one worth chasing, one worth telling. Because somewhere inside that dog's silent stare was the truth, and maybe, just maybe, the rest of the town needed to see it too. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early spring, the kind where the air smells like wet grass and the clouds hang low but never quite burst. Sophie had finished school just after lunch. A substitute teacher had signed her out, someone no one recognized. The office staff remembered a man with a soft voice and a clipboard, saying there had been a family emergency. He signed her name, nodded politely, and left with her. No one thought to question it at the time. Outside, a few classmates remembered seeing Sophie walking along Maple Street, her red backpack swinging behind her, her little dog trotting beside her like always. Rusty had grown since the first day they brought him home from the shelter, but he was still small then, still full of puppy energy. The two of them had been inseparable. Sophie called him her shadow. They were seen near the corner store, waiting to cross the road. A cashier inside glanced up and saw the girl pat Rusty's head. Then she stepped off the curb. And that was it. No one remembered seeing them after that. Not the man with the newspaper on the bench. Not the teenagers skateboarding down the block. They were just gone. Hours passed before anyone realized something was wrong. Elise had driven to the school, expecting Sophie to come running into her arms like she always did. But the teacher said she was picked up early. Elise's hands began to shake. She asked who. They checked the log. The name meant nothing. Elise said she never arranged for anyone to pick her up. That was when the fear set in like ice water. The police were called. Flyers were printed. Helicopters flew over the town. People searched the woods, the creek, the drainage ditches. Rusty was missing too, which made everyone hope. Maybe she'd run away with her dog. Maybe they were hiding somewhere, waiting to be found. But no one found them. Not that night. Not the next day. One woman came forward a week later. She was walking her own dog near the South Trail and remembered hearing tires squeal. She looked up and saw a dark SUV speeding off. She couldn't see who was inside. The windows were tinted. The plates were dirty. She told the police. They took her statement. But it wasn't enough. The trail went cold. Days turned into weeks. Rusty didn't come home. Elise sat on the porch every night with a flashlight, whispering her daughter's name into the wind. But the wind never answered, just carried her voice away. Then, 2 months later, a dog was spotted near the edge of town, covered in mud, ribs showing, limping slightly. He wouldn't let anyone near him. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just disappeared whenever someone tried to get close. No one connected him to Sophie. Not then. They just thought he was another stray. But it was him. Rusty had made it out. He had followed her, chased the car, tried to fight. Maybe he had bitten someone. Maybe he had jumped into the back seat. Maybe he had been thrown from it. No one would ever know exactly what happened that day. All they knew was that Rusty survived. And somehow, through pain and fear and distance, he found his way back to the last place he saw her, the bus stop, the corner of Maple and 3rd, where she had once waited for him with open arms. He came back. And he waited. Because Rusty never forgot. Matt sat across the street in his car, the engine off and his coffee cold. Rusty was already there, curled beside the bench like a statue shaped by time. The 7:15 bus hissed to a stop, its doors folding open. Rusty didn't move. Matt watched him closely, not with the eyes of a reporter now, but as someone pulled into something bigger than he could explain. A dog didn't wait this long without a reason. The bus sat for a minute, then rolled away with a low growl. Rusty lifted his head, slowly, and stood. He gave the road one last look before turning and walking off. Matt slipped out of the car and followed from a distance. Rusty didn't move like a stray. He didn't sniff for food or look over his shoulder. He moved with purpose, like his feet already knew the way. Past the café, past the old hardware store, behind the rows of school buildings now quiet for spring break. Matt kept back, trying not to crunch the gravel beneath his boots too loud. Rusty reached a fence near the back of the middle school, the kind with slats wide enough for a dog to slip through. Matt climbed over it, careful not to make a sound. Behind the school sat a long row of forgotten things. A broken swing set, faded cones, and tucked behind it all, a small, rusted storage unit with peeling green paint. Its lock hung askew, the metal eaten by years of rain and rust. Rusty walked up to the door and sat. Matt's heart began to race. "Is this it?" he whispered. He stepped forward and grabbed the handle. The lock gave with a bit of force, falling to the dirt like it had been waiting to let go. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old plastic. Stacked chairs, a few gym mats, scattered equipment boxes. Matt turned on his phone flashlight and stepped inside. And then he saw it. Tucked into the far corner, beneath a cracked bin full of kickballs, was a faded backpack. The red fabric was streaked with dirt, the zipper half open, the strap still twisted like someone had dropped it fast. Matt crouched down, his hands shaking as he reached for it. There was a small keychain hanging from one of the zippers, Sophie's name, spelled out in chipped pink letters. Matt's throat tightened. He opened the front pocket. Inside was a crumpled drawing, water-stained but still visible. A girl with stick legs and wild hair, standing beside a dog. His tail was wagging. Rusty stepped closer, nose low, eyes on the bag. He let out a sound, not a bark, not a whimper, just a quiet breath, like he remembered. Matt stood and looked down at the old dog, then back at the bag in his hands. It wasn't just a memory, it was a sign. Sophie had been here. Maybe not long, maybe only for a moment, but she had been here. And Rusty, all this time, had been trying to show them. He didn't forget. He had never forgotten. The knock on Elise Hastings' front door came just before sunset. She opened it slowly, still in her house sweater, hair pulled back, eyes tired from another day that had felt too long. Matt stood there, holding something carefully wrapped in a clear plastic bag. Inside was a red backpack, faded and stained by time. For a second, Elise didn't breathe. Matt spoke gently. "We found it behind the school, an old storage unit. It was hidden, but it's hers. The name tag's still on it." Elise reached for the bag with trembling fingers. She pressed it to her chest and shut her eyes. The ache in her chest, buried under layers of silence and survival, cracked open. She didn't cry. Not yet. Her voice came out small. "Where?" "I'll show you," Matt said. "But there's something else. Someone." They drove in silence. Elise held the backpack the entire ride, like it was made of glass. When they pulled up near the bus stop, Rusty was already there, sitting by the bench as he always did. He didn't look up at first. He stared down the road, just like he always had, waiting. Matt stepped out first, then opened Elise's door. She stood slowly. At first, she didn't see him clearly in the low light. But as she crossed the street, something in her changed. Her steps faltered. Her breath caught. Rusty turned his head. He stared at her, eyes softening. He stood, shaky but steady, and took a slow step forward. Elise dropped to her knees in the middle of the sidewalk. The backpack slid from her arms. Her hands hovered, unsure. "Rusty?" she said, voice cracking. "Is it really you?" The dog in front of her whimpered, just once, a soft, broken sound that cut through the air like thunder. He took another step, then another, and lowered himself at her feet, his head bowing as if he had done something wrong. She reached out, touched his head, and her fingers curled into his fur. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You came back." Her hands shook as she stroked his head, tears finally falling. She bent over him, her forehead resting against his, and the sound that came from her chest was the kind of cry that doesn't ask for anything, just lets go of everything it had been holding for too long. Rusty didn't move. He stayed there, eyes closed, like her touch was something he hadn't dared to hope for, a homecoming that had taken too long. Elise rocked slightly, still kneeling in the growing dark, the old backpack lying forgotten beside them. "You waited all this time," she whispered. 7 years. You never left." Her fingers found the worn white patch on his chest, still shaped like a crooked heart. She remembered Sophie brushing that spot every night, calling him her brave boy. Elise kissed the top of his head. "But where is she?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Where's my baby?" Rusty didn't answer. He just laid his head in her lap, his body warm, his breath slow. And though no words passed between them, something deeper did, something that said he had tried, that he had followed her, fought for her, searched through places no one else had dared to go. And now, at last, he had brought a piece of Sophie home. The vet's office was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room when everyone is holding their breath. Rusty lay on the table, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady waves. He had been sedated gently, just enough to let them look him over without causing stress. Elise sat nearby, hands clenched in her lap, eyes never leaving him. She hadn't slept in 2 days, but she wouldn't leave him, not now, not when he had come back to her. Dr. Kendra Patel moved carefully, running her hands over his frame, checking for old injuries and signs of illness. "He's tough," she said softly. "You can see it in the way his body healed. Scar tissue here on the ribs, and look at this, his paws. They're worn down like he's walked miles every day." Elise nodded, barely hearing. He was searching. The vet gently lifted the faded red collar from around Rusty's neck. It was cracked in places, worn thin from time and weather. Elise reached for it with both hands, holding it like something sacred. "She put this on him the day we adopted him. She called it his superhero cape." Kendra took the collar back, turning it over carefully. "Let's see if we can get a scan." She waved the chip reader over it, and after a moment, it beeped. The screen flashed. Rusty. Registered to Sophie Hastings. Date: March 22, 7 years ago. Elise gasped softly. Her daughter's name on the screen made it real again. Not just memory, proof. He had been hers. Still was. Kendra kept examining the collar, her fingers pausing over a thick seam along the inner edge. "That's odd," she murmured. "This stitching isn't factory-made. Someone did this by hand." She grabbed a small pair of scissors and began cutting along the seam with slow precision. Elise leaned forward, watching closely. The thread came away, and inside the lining, something small fell out onto the tray with a faint tap. A plastic capsule, no bigger than a sewing thimble. Kendra opened it carefully, and inside was a single scrap of paper, folded and worn, its edges soft from time. She unfolded it slowly, and the two women stared. A few lines, faded pencil, a partial address. W River RD, Unit 4, Elk. The last part was smudged. A water stain had eaten through the rest. Elise's hand flew to her mouth. "That's Sophie's handwriting," she said. "She used to make her S's backwards. Look, there." Matt, who had arrived minutes before, stepped closer. Elk Harbor? Elk Haven? That's upstate." Kendra laid the collar and paper back on the tray. She must have hidden it. Or made him wear it. Maybe she couldn't leave any other way. Rusty stirred then, even under sedation, his body twitching lightly, as if he knew they'd found it. Elise reached for his paw, held it gently, tears returning to her eyes. "She tried," she whispered. "She tried to send a message, and he carried it all this time. A dog, waiting 7 years, through every storm, every lonely night, never letting go of what he'd been trusted to carry. A name, a clue, a thread of hope. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the truth." The road to Elk Haven twisted through thick pine trees, the branches overhead knitting together like fingers, blocking out the sun. A small convoy of unmarked SUVs rolled down the gravel path, tires crunching over fallen needles and old stones. Matt rode in the back seat of the lead car, gripping the printed map from the capsule. His heart thudded in time with every bump in the road. It had taken 2 days to trace the partial address. A retired postal worker remembered that Unit 4 used to belong to an old logging cabin, long since sold and left off the grid. It didn't show up on any modern map. But with the help of local rangers and satellite images, they found it. Deep in the woods, miles from any town, no electricity, no phone lines, just silence. They stopped at a clearing. The cabin sat crooked, its roof bowed, windows covered with boards, door half hanging off the hinges. Moss crept up its sides, and the chimney was cracked near the base. There were no signs of life, no fresh footprints, no smoke. It looked like time had swallowed it whole. Elise stepped out of one of the vehicles, Rusty beside her on a leash. He sniffed the air, low and slow, ears twitching. His body stiffened. He looked at the door, then back at her. No bark. Just a look, a memory. The sheriff gave the signal. Officers approached carefully, guns lowered but ready. They swept the cabin in minutes. Empty. Dust covered every surface. Old cans lined a shelf, rusted through. A broken chair lay on its side, but something didn't feel right. In the far corner, beneath the rug, one officer found a trapdoor, hidden but not locked. They opened it. A steep wooden staircase led down into darkness. The air changed as soon as they descended. Cooler, damper. It smelled of dirt and old wood and something else, something bitter. The cellar was small, barely enough space for a grown man to stand. There was a cot with a thin mattress, a rusted bucket, and a broken light bulb hanging from a wire that no longer worked. On the wall, scratched into the wood with something sharp, were 5 words. "My name is Sophie. Help." Elise gasped, knees giving out. Matt caught her just in time. Rusty stood at the top of the stairs, staring down, ears flat, his whole body trembling. They found what was left of her behind the wall. A loose panel slid open to reveal a shallow space, barely enough for a child to hide in. Bones, small, delicate, a red shoelace, tangled in the corner. The medical team didn't need long to confirm. The truth was ugly. Sophie had been here. For how long, no one could say. But the message on the wall, the hidden collar, the scrap of paper, they told a story. She'd been taken, trapped, left behind. But she had tried to be found. And her dog, the one she'd trusted more than anyone, had never stopped looking. Rusty stood beside the cellar steps long after they brought her out. He didn't make a sound. He just lowered his head and closed his eyes. He had brought them here. And at last, Sophie's voice had been heard. The coroner's report came back late on a Wednesday afternoon. The sheriff read it in silence, lips pressed into a thin line. Elise sat across from him, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of untouched tea. Matt stood by the window, watching the trees shift in the breeze, not ready to hear the words out loud. "She was alive for a while," the sheriff said quietly. "We believe. Several weeks. Maybe more." Elise didn't speak. She just nodded once. the way someone does when they already know the truth but needed to hear it anyway. There were no signs of trauma, he continued. No poison, no injuries that suggest a violent death. It was neglect. She was left there, forgotten. No food, no water, nothing. A single tear slid down Elise's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. She was alone. Matt turned from the window. Not the whole time. Rusty lay curled at Elise's feet, as he had since the discovery. He was quiet now, calmer, but there was a weight behind his eyes that hadn't lifted. The vet had patched him up. He'd been malnourished, had old scars along his side, a healed-over wound near his hip, but none of it surprised anyone. He had been through something terrible and had come out the other side still standing. What the sheriff didn't say, but what they all now believed, was this: Rusty had been there too. He had been with her. Somehow, some way, he had found her after she was taken. Maybe he'd chased the SUV. Maybe he followed a scent. Maybe he was taken too. No one knew exactly how, but he had been in that cabin. He had seen what no one else had. And when it was too late, when Sophie was gone, he had escaped. The broken slats in the cellar wall, the claw marks on the wooden door, the blood on the rusted hinges, it was all his. He had tried to get out. He had fought. And once he did, he went back. Back to the bus stop. Back to the last place she had smiled at him. To the corner where her voice had once echoed through the air. He returned there day after day. Through storms, through summer heat and winter snow. His body grew older. His fur lost its shine. But he never stopped. He waited because he remembered. Because dogs don't forget the ones they love, not even after death. Elise ran her hand gently over his back. "You stayed with her," she said softly. "You kept her company. You were the only one who didn't give up." Rusty lifted his head and looked at her. There was something in his eyes that felt deeper than grief. It was purpose, memory, love. 7 years. That's how long he waited. Not for food, not for shelter, but for someone to find what he could not say. He had carried her story the only way he could, step by step, day by day, sitting quietly at the place she should have come home to. Rusty hadn't just waited. He had remembered. The town square was quiet the morning of the memorial. Chairs lined the grassy park near the fountain, and a new stone had been placed beneath the old oak tree, the same tree where the town hung lights each December, where children gathered for story time in the summer. Now it stood guard over something sacred, a name. Sophie Hastings. 2006. 2016. Forever loved, never forgotten. Elise stood in front of it, hands clasped, her eyes full but steady. Matt was beside her, holding a folded copy of the front page. The headline read simply, "The Dog Who Waited." People had come from every corner of Fairhill, teachers, neighbors, shopkeepers, even children who had never met Sophie but grew up hearing her name whispered in quiet prayers. Some cried openly. Others stood in silence, heads bowed, eyes on the stone. Rusty sat beside Elise, his head held high, his red collar freshly cleaned. Someone had brushed his coat that morning, and though time had left its marks on him, white in his muzzle, a small limp in his back leg, he looked proud, almost regal. The mayor gave a short speech. So did the sheriff, who promised they would continue the investigation to find who had taken Sophie and left her in that cabin. But it wasn't the words that stayed with people. It was the moment Elise knelt by the stone, placed her hand on her daughter's name, and whispered something only Rusty seemed to hear. From that day on, Rusty didn't wait alone. Each morning, before the sun had fully crested the hills, Elise laced up her shoes, filled a thermos with coffee, and walked to the corner of Maple and 3rd. Rusty walked beside her, step by step, just like he had for all those years by himself. They would sit on the bench together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Elise softly talking about Sophie, the way she hummed in the mornings, how she used to carry 3 books in her backpack because she couldn't pick just one. They stayed until the 7:15 bus came and went. Rusty still watched it, his eyes steady, ears tilted forward. Elise watched it too, her hand resting on his back. And when the bus pulled away, they walked home together, slow and quiet, through streets that now knew their story. Rusty never once missed a morning. Rain, snow, cold winds, it didn't matter. He was there. But he wasn't waiting anymore. Not really. He was remembering, honoring. Children waved to him from the windows of the school bus. Parents pointed and told the story to the little ones who didn't understand. That dog, they said. He waited for someone he loved. For years. Some even left flowers by Sophie's stone or tied red ribbons to the oak tree. Rusty had no medals, no certificates, but in Fairhill, he became something more. A symbol of loyalty, of love that refuses to fade. And when Elise looked at him, she didn't see a stray anymore. She saw the one soul who had stayed with her daughter, when no one else could. The one who had carried her memory through 7 silent years. The one who reminded the world that love, real love, does not vanish. It waits. Even if it has to wait forever. If this story moved you, the way it moved us, take a moment to hit that like button. And if you believe in the kind of loyalty Rusty showed, the kind that never forgets, subscribe to this channel for more stories that stay with you long after the screen fades.